A few weeks ago, I was preparing a reflection, and I came across a quote from Mary McLeod Bethune. Bethune was a civil rights activist, an educator, and author. She worked to advance education opportunities for young black children. She died in 1955, but she wrote this: "If we have the courage and tenacity of our forebears, who stood firmly like a rock against the lash of slavery, we shall find a way to do for our day what they did for theirs." That quote stayed with me for a long time. It resonated with me, and I thought of it, and then I thought of that verse, the first verse from the 12th chapter of the letter to the Hebrews. The author writes, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us rid ourselves of every burden of sin that clings to us and persevere in running the race that lies before us." We don't live our Catholic faith alone. We need one another to challenge, comfort, direct, help us, a community of witnesses who are with us as we serve and follow as Jesus did. But we also have a history, don't we? A history that includes the courageous forebearers that Bethune wrote about. A history that includes this great cloud of witnesses the author of Hebrews wrote about. These last months have been unsettling. We've been shaken by this pandemic, by the sin of racism that continues in our culture, by the economic and social challenges that continue to divide us. And there are many important voices right now that need to come together, that we have to listen to, a conversation that can help us to choose what we can do to persevere in running the race that lies before us. But we also need, I believe, to hear the voices from the past. There is a wisdom and a grace from their lives that will enable us to do for our day what they did for theirs. 40 years ago when I was in graduate school, I would sometimes attend Mass at St. Augustine Church in Washington, D.C., specifically the 12:30 p.m. Gospel Mass. And I was always happy when the choir would sing the old spiritual, "We've come this far by faith." I think of that spiritual a lot these days. I think of the voices of the past who not only sang that song, but they lived that song in their life. We've come this far by faith, leaning on the Lord, trusting in His holy word. He never failed me yet. Oh, I can't turn around. We've come this far by faith. So this week, I'd like to focus on a few of those voices. Some might be familiar to you, others not at all. They are the voices that are helping me in these days to lean on the Lord and to trust His holy word. So today I'm thinking about Sister Thea Bowman. Sister Thea Bowman was born in 1937 in Mississippi. She was the only daughter of Theo and Mary Esther Bowman. He was a physician, she was a teacher, and Thea was the grandchild of former slaves. She was given at birth the name Bertha Elizabeth Bowman. As a child, she said she was always interested in the wisdom of the elders of the community. She would continue to call them the old folks. As a child, an only child, she was precocious, always asking questions. And even though her parents were not Catholic, they sent her to Catholic school. Bertha Elizabeth Bowman experienced racism and segregation and the struggle for civil rights in Mississippi. As a child, she immersed herself in the culture, the history, the traditions of her African American background. And she was drawn to the Catholic Church. She said she experienced how the members of the church loved each other. They served the poor and the needy. And she said she saw how faith was being put into action. So she became a Catholic. She joined a religious order, the Franciscan Sisters of Perpetual Adoration, and when she professed her vows, she was given the name Sister Thea. She began her teaching career in the 1960s during those turbulent years of the civil rights movement. She would later say it was a time of spiritual and cultural awakening. Sister Thea abandoned the habit, often choosing to wear African garb. Sister Thea was a tireless evangelist. She worked to help those in her diocese and other dioceses to move the church from thinking of itself only as a Eurocentric Catholic Church and to be more aware of the spirituality, the needs, the culture, and the voice of the church's black and brown sisters and brothers. She was tenacious and firm, but she was always joyful. She always had this great, great smile. She was a person who believed in the power of diversity. She once said, if I begin to believe that we're all alike, look at what I'm going to miss. The richness, beauty, wholeness, and harmony of what God has created. In 1984, Sister Thea was diagnosed with breast cancer, and despite treatments, the cancer metastasized to her bones. But she continued on, preaching and teaching and trying to find unity in the church through diversity. Of all her writings, all her sermons, all her appearances, her most profound one took place in 1989, just months before she died. She spoke to the bishops of the United States. That speech, all these years later, is still profound and moving. You can see it on YouTube. She is in a wheelchair. She is frail, and she's sitting before a crowd of men, almost all of them white. And in her speech, she spoke about the contributions black people have made to this country and to the church. This was 30 years ago that she said her people were still trying to find a home in this country and in the church, struggling to gain equal access, she said, to opportunity. She spoke of how institutions, even the church, do not always value the story of every human person, especially when the person in front of you looks nothing like you. Sister Thea said the church must be an example to the world, a witness to the inclusive community Jesus calls his disciples to be. She told the bishops this: what does it mean to be black and Catholic? It means that I come to my church fully functioning. That doesn't frighten you, does it? She asked. I come to my church fully functioning. I bring myself, my black self, all that I am, all that I have, all that I hope to become. I bring my experience. I bring my culture. I bring my African American song and dance and gesture and movement and teaching and preaching and healing and responsibility as a gift to the church. Thea Bowman died 30 years ago this past March. Yet I think her words and her life are needed at this hour. Her voice reminds us that the church is much bigger than a local parish, a diocese, or even a country. It is a diverse community, rich in culture and tradition, a community of believers from all over the world. Time and again, Sister Thea would say it is not enough to complain about the church. She would say if you're part of the church, then you have to bring your whole self to the church. But I keep coming back to that image of her sitting in the wheelchair, 53 years old, her life coming to an end in front of a room mostly of men. She was challenging. She was strong in her observations about the oppression of people of color, even in the church. But she also had this spirit of hope, that her challenge, her voice, could help them see things differently and move them to change. Maybe today, in the midst of all of the talk of the necessary systemic change that we need, we might pause and remember what Sister Thea did. She first looked at people, realizing it wasn't enough to talk about issues without knowing individuals, without trying to understand their stories, their lives. I imagine Sister Thea looking at us right now and asking you bring in your whole self to the church? A responsibility that is really a gift to the church to bring your whole self to the community. Her voice might say to us, do you have an openness in your daily life to those whose culture, whose way of praying, whose life experience may be different than yours? What could you learn from them? And as importantly, what could they learn from you? Sister Thea Bowman said that when she died, she simply wanted to be remembered as a child of God. We hear her voice today, and she challenges us to remember that all of us are children of God, and that real transformation, real change cannot happen if we do not live with that understanding.